topic altogether. So how are investors thinking about this problem? There's, just like in any market, when you're starting to approach deployment of a new solution, the reality changes the plan. So there's been a fundamental change, I think, in the smart investors that are looking at this problem of what this problem really is. And so they're starting to see the different areas of energy storage in a segmented fashion, where you've got some solutions which they can charge a lot for, and then some solutions which may not be cost competitive. And most of them obviously are there. There's another challenging element is that in every region, not only within a country, but like within states or even within regions of a state, you have different market forces. And obviously between Asia, Europe, North America, there's a wide variety of incentives. The biggest paradigm shift, I think, from investors is the understanding that you cannot deploy renewables in a broad fashion without addressing this problem. And so the market pain is just going to increase as you start increasing the deployment of renewables. Because right now, 1% for the US, that does not cause a significant network problem. But if you try to imagine 20% or more renewables, because the end game is to be 100% renewables, right? That's completely impossible with the current energy storage technologies. Even if you had fantastic renewable energy generation, you would hit this brick wall with regards to the grid stability. So another big driver for change is the concept that all transportation is going to be electrified. So if you're thinking of all terrestrial transportation, obviously ships and airplanes are going to have to run on biofuels. But as far as terrestrial transportation, most of the long-term planning, the smart folks, I would say, understand that everything's going to be electrified. And this could be probably 20, 30 years. So in the end, grid storage is the Achilles heel for renewable deployment. What are the other things that are driving this change? You have the energy independence issue, and you have T. Boone Pickens is a big advocate of that. Or at least a couple years ago, people started to understand that it doesn't make sense for the United States to keep sending $800 billion overseas. Economically, that's not sustainable. So, which requires us to go to electrified transportation infrastructure, which requires energy storage. Then you also have climate change. Locally, here we have some incredible resources in this area, Scripps Institution of Oceanography and UCSD. There was a conference about 2 weeks ago, actually it was last week, at Scripps, and it was titled Climate and National Security. It was attended by a lot of the scientific community, not only within the climate community that is usually in the forefront, but also the US military. So you had admirals from the US Navy talking about the security implications of climate change. And these are not folks that work at the UN or somewhere in the UK that might be, in a PR challenge with some sectors of our population, but this is the US military, whose job is to assess threats to the United States. And they are looking at climate change as a threat multiplier. So one of the questions that was posed at this symposium by an air marshal of India was, what are the military plans for a population, for a forced migration of 60 million people? So we're talking disruptive changes to our climate, where you could have in Southeast Asia national security implications. And besides, you have crop failure is the biggest challenge. And looking back at the 1990s, the CIA threat assessment reports were looking at this, where if a few billion people have constraints on their food supply, you might have a national security issue. So that's increasing. And then you have wild cards. We have unknown unknowns. Because in the climate, you're talking about a complex, nonlinear system with positive feedback loops. And you have a lot of these nonlinear drivers out there. So the US military is actually looking at this threat very seriously. And then you also have strategic interests. Going back to the $800 billion going out to other countries for our oil needs, that means that money is going to maybe countries that aren't so friendly to US interests. So there's a lot of drivers now. It's not just a bunch of hippies with flip-flops and granola bars. It's US military admirals and top government policy think tank people that are starting to see this problem for what it is. So what results from this synthesis? Eventually you're going to have a carbon markets. We don't have that. We have right now a pretend carbon market, a fiction of an emerging and efficient market. But eventually you're going to have that. And whether it's a straight tax or some other mechanism, there has to be some sort of internalization of cost on carbon. Which means you're going to have cost increase for energy. Because if we're externalizing the cost, you can't blame a large oil company because we all came here mostly using their product. Okay? So you need to level the playing field, which means energy overall is going to get more expensive because you're externalizing the cost, not only companies, but consumers. And if we don't do that, what we need to be prepared to do is increase our national security expenditures manyfold. So we have two choices. Bankrupt our state by more military spending over the next few decades, or, and this is exactly how admirals and military planners are looking at that, or we have to change the way things work. That was, of course, to cheer you up. Now, continuing on my happy theme, death spiral. I mean, what could bring more happiness? One of the challenging aspects of the science discoveries that we're seeing in the climate science area, in paleoclimate area, is every year it looks like we were wrong even more so. So if you look back 10, 15 years ago, as far as the predictions of when we're going to lose ice cover in the Arctic during the summer, most scientists, even the craziest ones, would tell you 100 or a few hundred years. Well, these predictions, just like the acidification of the ocean, have been changing exponentially in the wrong way. So this almost looks like a grid stabilization problem. But these are different global climate models predicting when the sea ice is going to go to zero. So, and this was presented by the Naval Postgraduate School. So this is, again, not a hippie flip-flops with granola theme, but people that are looking out for our national security interests. And they see this as a threat multiplier because you have, this is the actual observed ice cover. So this would not, typically wouldn't mean anything to somebody on Wall Street. But if this is going to zero in 2016 plus or minus 3 years, that means that the air conditioning for the northern hemisphere could possibly conk out, which has clear economic impacts. So if you're driving through Imperial Desert in Arizona in August, it's 120 degrees, and you're miles and miles from anywhere, and I tell you in 5 minutes AC is going out, you get real creative. So this is something that is going to drive innovation. And it's not a good thing, but this is reality. Now,